Hi, my name is Krystyna Poray, Goddu, and I make books for kids. You might know some of the characters in my books. I write about real-life characters, like the poets Edna St. Vincent Millay and Emily Dickinson, and the ballerina Alicia Markova, whose name was changed from Lily Marks when she was a young girl. Today I want to talk to you about one character in particular, the American poet Emily Dickinson, who lived from 1830 to 1886 in Amherst, Massachusetts. My book about Emily is called Becoming Emily.
Tell us about your character.
I always felt drawn to Emily Dickinson because we shared the same birthday, December 10th, even though she was obviously born way more than 100 years before me. When I started learning about Emily, I saw we had some things in common. We both had one sister and one brother, even though I'm the oldest child and she was the middle one. Emily loved school, just like I did, and she was known for being a good writer, which I was too. We also both loved to read, but I was luckier than Emily because my parents let me read all the books I wanted. Mrs. Pigglewiggle, Jesus and Ramona, Little Women, Anne of Green Gables. Emily's father thought reading was a waste of time unless you were reading the Bible or maybe a few other books with important information. When Emily and her siblings wanted to read books just for fun, they had to sneak them into the house and keep them hidden from their parents. And then there's poetry. I wrote my very first poem when I was in second grade, and I never stopped writing. Emily, though, didn't start writing poems till she was almost an adult. When she was a child, she wrote lots of letters to her friends and her family when they were away. But when she started writing poetry, she kept it a secret from most people. We don't really know why. There are a lot of mysteries about Emily Dickinson that are still unsolved. As an adult, Emily devoted herself to writing poems and letters, and she only shared some of the poems with a few people she really trusted. As she got older, she spent most of her time in her bedroom writing. She stopped visiting friends or letting friends visit her. People in town began to think something strange had happened to her. But Emily didn't care. She still wrote lots of letters to the people she cared about, sometimes sending them flowers from her garden. And she wrote poems and more poems and more poems. It wasn't until after she died that her sister found the hundreds and hundreds of poems Emily had written throughout her lifetime. After the poems were discovered, scholars spent many years trying to figure out what order Emily had written them in and which words she really wanted to use. Because often she would write a couple of words on top of each other, as though she were trying to decide on which was the best one.
How did you come up with this character?
When I first learned about Emily Dickinson, I was taught that she was a mysterious recluse who never left her bedroom, who didn't like people. But when I started learning more about her, I found out that for much of her life, she was actually a lively, funny, smart girl who loved nature, music, her family, and her friends. I decided I wanted to write about Emily and show her as the person she really was for most of her life.
What made you want to become a creator of books?
The thing I loved to do most when I was young was to read. When I learned to read, I fell in love with books. I read every minute I could. Because I loved books and reading so much, I thought from a very young age that, of course, I would write books too. Why wouldn't I want to create what I loved so much? There was never any question in my mind that I would become a writer. In fact, from the moment I wrote that first poem in second grade, I always thought of myself as a writer.
If you found a whale in your bathtub, what would you do?
First, I would probably scream out of shock. But then I'd think, this must be a magic whale to end up in my bathtub. So I'd hop up on its back and ask it to take me on a trip under the ocean water, where I could explore all the magical sea life I never get to see.